am I required to tell you everything about my past?
To what extent does that thing that you haven't shared or talked about having an impact on your relationship, whether you think so or not? So I think that becomes the sort of this differentiating factor.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I don't feel like I should tell you everything about my past, but I feel like if it's a past that's affecting the present, I should share that.
One of the things that would keep someone from sharing would be a bit of shame around it or the feeling that you might disapprove, right?
True.
So, like, how do you actually develop that trust that you can be fully open with each other around traumas, also knowing that your partner is going to really be able to be supportive of you and not use that as a weapon?
Welcome back to the Interracial Couple Podcast, and today we're talking about if couples should share everything with each other.
Yeah, or kind of the difference between withholding something and just simply not sharing.
Yeah.
Or if there's a difference.
For my women's group, there's an agreement between the women that whatever is said in the group stays in the group.
And same with the men's groups.
And so whenever I share something, when I feel like I need to share something that happened or I said at the women's group, it's always I have to share like my own point of view or from my own experience.
Your experience.
My
yeah,
experience.
So what you felt.
What I felt, not what someone else said or,
Right.
you know.
But that's a different thing because, and I want to, since we also talked about therapy, I think that's the other thing is that when you go into those spaces, you're actually exploring. You're like in the process of uncovering. And some of that, like as soon as you have a realization, right? Like, oh my gosh, you know, I had this thing, for example, around, I was doing this group therapy thing that was really cool. And some stuff from my very early childhood came up that I had never ever really known before, and it was pretty profound. And I can see how, you know, like I said, I'm a bit of an open book, but for me to kind of understand the way my relationship to my mother was impacted by my grandmother dying very young and you know, and other family issues that were going on, like that was important for me to share. But at the same time, there were other pieces that was like, you know what, I'm in the process of learning about myself that I want to understand it before I share it with you.
Yeah. And I don't have an expectation for you to share with me whatever you're sharing in these spaces. So part of it was like, I had, even in our house, like I was in the kitchen cooking and you were in the men's group and I had you sharing of an experience and I was like, Matthew, I can hear you.
I had my headphones in, so you're only hearing my story.
You were actually telling your story,
yeah.
But I was like, actually, I didn't even want to hear it.
Yeah.
You know, because I want to respect, and it was like, I want to respect your space.
So, yeah.
You know, like it was important for me, like I want to give you that space to explore without me hearing what you're saying. And, you know, so that was important.
Yeah, and that kind of like makes me think of something I appreciate, that I've heard other men talk about, which is one thing that's also hard for them to do, like either so therapy or anything, is that their wives want to know, like, what did you talk about? Or it's kind of like nosy and kind of, sorry, you know, like kind of wanting the details. And for a lot of men to uncover and to go into actually exploring some of the emotional sides and how they can articulate it, it can take a really long time to actually understand it in a way that I feel confident with where I stand, that I can share it. And if I don't have the opportunity to go through that, now, like, that becomes a problem. You know, like we actually need our own safe space to plumb the depths, as it were, in order to be able to understand it and then articulate it and then share it.
Yeah, even like, it's making me think about a couple of weeks ago, you went out with your friends for a whole day and you were like, I don't think I should go. And I was like, you actually need to go hang out with other men so that you can get to like talk about guy stuff. Like, I feel like it's important, and I don't feel like I need to know what you talk about, because I feel like there's like some part of like relationship issues or just stuff that's life issues that you'd want to process with your friends than me, you know? And like for me, the same thing is like some things I want to process with my friends. I don't feel like I need to come to you with everything, you know? And it's also hard on the relationship when you like make your boyfriend or your partner your husband the therapist, so
it's impossible. And men often will do that more often with their wives. And I think that becomes also an issue, is that actually having things outside of the marriage is really healthy. Like, you can't be everything to me.
No.
You're most things to me, by the way, but
No.
but you can't be everything, and nor should you be.
And I don't want to be, because I don't have the capacity to be everything to you, you know. So when we talk about like sharing, like I just kind of feel like when you are in like therapy or in like safe spaces, the stuff that you share there, I necessarily don't need to know.
Yeah, and there was something that came up for me in the men's group a couple years ago, more than a couple years ago. And it was one of the most profound experiences that I had. And it was something that I've been carrying with me for a very long time. And that was what I learned recently is called intrusive thoughts. And I guess this is a thing. You know those thoughts, and not everyone has this, but a lot of people do. You think something and you really wish you didn't think it, and you don't want to think it, but yet it's like, don't think of a pink elephant, you know? And it's just like, And there were things in my life that I had thought about that I was so ashamed of, as though I had actually acted on thoughts. And I remember being in my men's group, and one guy like shared something that my jaw hit the floor. I was so impressed with his openness to talk about this thing that was so deeply vulnerable. And it gave me the strength to say, this is something that I've been going through. And I shared a thought, and one guy was just like, what are you talking about? Like, that's a thought, you know? And then coming home, I finally got up the courage to tell you. And you said to me, you said, your thoughts aren't you. Those are just your thoughts. Like, I have thoughts all the time. Like, what's the big deal? People have thoughts. People have negative thoughts. They have positive thoughts. Those are just your thoughts. What do you do with them becomes the different thing. And it was so amazing to me because I was able to share. And even if it had been something that I had done, right?
Yeah.
To be able to actually share that in a way that I could then process it, because things that you do, cancerous, you kind of push it down, and it's like this thing that's always there that you're like, oh, this doesn't feel good. For me, it was, sure, there were actions, and we've talked about those, but mostly the things that were hardest for me were not my actions. That's not true necessarily at the time. I made a lot of mistakes of doing things. But at that point, by the time I met you, I'd really worked through a lot of younger mistakes. But the thing that really bore with me was my thoughts, because that I couldn't get rid of. And as soon as I did speak it, actually, it's gone, actually. It's it has no more control over me.
And I think that the thing about that was, do you think that was affecting our relationship?
100%.
Yeah, and to me, it was intrusive thoughts. I have them all the time, so...
But you didn't have to tell me about them because Because
correct,
they don't
because
impact
I know, for me, it's I'm not my thoughts. Just because I think, I think one of the example that morning I gave you was I was on my way to school this morning, I was late, and then there's people who are crossing the street, taking their time, and in my head, I'm just oh my God, I just want to run them over. Does that make me a murderer because I want to run them over? No, it's just a thought.
Okay, well, if I ever do something bad, I'm going to have to make sure that I hide all the knives just in case that thought becomes an action.
And it to me was I have these thoughts all the time. I have weird thoughts all the time. Sometimes, a guy is passing by and I'm just I
get that too. I'm the kind of standing on the edge of a cliff or something. I like to climb mountains. I like to be on high places, and sometimes I actually have to walk away because I feel so compelled to jump. And it scares me to death. I guess I probably wouldn't. And maybe it's a little bit different now that I've processed that, because I haven't been on the edge of a 2,000-foot cliff since we had that
but I
conversation.
feel if you had, and this may be a sensitive topic to some people, is if those were suicidal thoughts, that you would need to share.
And I think that's where it comes down to the sharing versus withholding, is if they're actually suicidal thoughts, right? If it's not just oh my God, whatever, but if it's if it's actually a real thing, then that would have an enormous impact on your relationship. Also, if you're in a relationship and you're having suicidal thoughts, that means that there's some big stuff going on. And therefore, what you're not sharing becomes withholding.
Yeah.
One other thing that sometimes I think you and I overlook a bit when we have these conversations, and that is some of the baseline for where you're starting, right? So Brene Brown talks about vulnerability and the absolute necessity of being vulnerable, but also to know like how, with whom, and when to be vulnerable, to be totally honest, so as to protect yourself.
Yeah, so important. For me, I don't advise people to just be vulnerable. I think like being vulnerable to whom is so important.
Yes.
In this space to be vulnerable. I believe that, but one time I went out with a friend and we are not really that close, but she asked a question and I just opened my soul and I shared stuff with her that afterwards, like she just looked at me and she gave me nothing in terms of vulnerability. So I said so much, she said so little. And I left the conversation feeling so empty.
Yeah.
Because it was actually not the time and the space to share that.
Let me ask you this. How is your relationship with that person now?
It's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So, but now you've shared things like that with like your best friend or with me, and how are those relationships?
Great. The vulnerability improved the relationship, but the relationship with our friend, that did not help.
Right.
It didn't make us any closer than we were. It was just like, maybe I should have waited to be more closer to them to share that. And so I don't believe in like I'm not an open book.
Yep.
I don't share everything with everyone. And there isn't nothing in my life that I haven't shared. With someone.
Yeah.
So, because I believe like when you share something, it unloads something. But I have specific people in my life that I share stuff with. I don't share my life with everyone, so, but I don't know. Do you feel the same?
No, I think having that sort of that balance, I mean, I'm definitely more of an open book. I'm a kind of person who I will share. And part of that is that this isn't true for everyone, but for me, if I don't feel comfortable sharing it, generally that means I actually haven't fully processed it and I haven't learned the lesson from it. So to me, I don't want to share means what's going on. And I think as I grow older and stuff, I think one of the things that I also play with is, when is the time and how have I developed that relationship? So if I don't want to tell you something and it may come up, let's say we're having a conversation and I think, oh, that reminds me of, but I'm going to withhold that. That tells me something, one of two things. It tells me something about my relationship with that person, or it tells me something about my relationship to that story in my biography. So if I haven't done the healing for that, then I need to go back and look at it. And I talk about that with other people, but with you, my life partner, and for anyone else who's in a committed relationship, that becomes inextricably intertwined, this piece of, am I not there with you yet, or am I not there with the event yet? And so therefore, if it's with a friend, it's kind of like, whatever, I'm not there with you yet, or I don't trust you enough, or whatever. And I don't have to work on that.
Yeah.
But with you, I need to work on both. If that comes up for me, the question is, what's going on with me that I don't feel comfortable sharing it with you? And what's going on in our relationship that I don't feel comfortable sharing it? And maybe, what do I need from you, or what do I still need to foster within our relationship in order to give you the opportunity to step up and be there for me in that way?
Yeah, as we wrap up, the other thing that's important is also to understand that, there's different stages to the sharing, even in relationships. So it just matters like where you are at in the relationship, I didn't share everything about me in the first year even.
Pretty close. No, pretty close.
Pretty close?
Pretty close. But that's because within the first year, we decided, once we knew that this was our long-term relationship, which took us probably, about 9 months? Within the first 9 months, I don't think that there was actually one thing I remember.
That
only one thing that you didn't share.
But how do you know it's just one thing? You're so certain. You're so certain.
That's true. That is true. Well, because you actually said, there's one thing that I have yet to share.
Oh my God. There's 25 more that I haven't.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, I have something to look forward to. That means that our relationship is full of mystery. And I get to keep discovering new things that I didn't know before.
I actually think that's so important. I think it's important to share the big things, the things you feel like this is huge for me, and this is also huge for the relationship, but I think there's like also like mystery needs, like there need to be a little bit of mystery too in the relationship.
As long as I'm not going to be like, I can't believe you didn't tell me that. That was a total deal breaker, and now goodbye. That would be a different story.
Yeah, but I don't have anything that's a deal breaker to tell you.
The nice thing is, I'm in my early to mid 40s right now, and if you got 25 more things, that means by the time we get 70, if you tell me one a year, we'll be fully caught up by the time I'm 70.
Okay.
So thanks again for joining us. Make sure that you subscribe, and wherever you get your podcast, whether it's on YouTube or any podcast apps, and share what you've heard. If it's interesting, go ahead and pull out your phone and share it with the 5 or 10 people that you think would love to hear this, that you think that some of our insights as an interracial couple, as a couple in a moderately decent relationship, and discussing it would be a benefit to others. So go ahead and share that, and we will see you next week.
See you next week.